LA Social Science. My name is Otis Noble III. I am the Assistant Director of Community Engagement with the Division of Social Sciences. And welcome to another episode of, us at LA Social Science speaking to our amazing faculty here at UCLA. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tyrone Howard. Dr. Tyrone Howard is a professor of education. He is the Pritzker Family Endowed Chair in Education to Strengthen Families, and he is also the director of the Black Male Institute. Dr. Howard, welcome to LA Social Science. How are you, sir?
Doing great. How you doing? Oh, it's good to be here.
Good, good, good. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We know that you are a busy faculty member with all that's been going on, and your time is invaluable. So thank you for your time today.
No, my honor. It's my privilege, and I'm glad to be able to exchange in some discourse with you. Always enjoy this.
Definitely, definitely. So I ask a question of all that I get a chance to interview, and I hope you will play along. So, is there any music or a book that has helped you get through this pandemic?
Wow. I'm a jazz head, Otis. So give me some Coltrane, give me some Monk, give
Oh,
me some Mingus,
yeah.
give me some Miles Davis, give me some Kenny Burrell, give me some Marcus Miller. That's what's got me through. My jazz playlist has gotten stronger and more robust throughout the last 7 8 months. That's my go-to right now.
Wow, you actually filled my soul as you said name by name. So thank you for that. I'm actually give me some Kenny Burrell later on today.
There you go. There you go.
So can you talk to us about the state of education current?
Yeah. So, the state of education has always been precarious for certain populations. And I think really what we've seen over the last 7 almost 8 months as it pertains to how students are doing with COVID is that there's really three main buckets that I'm concerned about. And I want to kind of walk you through, if I can, briefly, each one of the buckets that I think really kind of give us an indication of where we are with education. The first bucket is the fact that when the coronavirus hit, we realized that while we always have had inequities in schools, that the pandemic shone a brighter light on those inequities. So as schools went to this remote learning, we found out that lots of students and their families did not have access to internet.
Mm,
Lots of students and their families did not have broadband.
mm,
Lots of families and students did not have devices. So you can't just flip the switch on and say we're going online, assuming that everyone has access to internet.
mhm.
You've got, in some cases, folks who got three, four, or five folks in a household, and there's one device. How does that work with learning? So one of the big concerns in bucket number one is that there's been significant loss of learning. Young folks just don't have access to a device where learning and where teaching was supposedly taking place. And we know that learning loss is huge because as students start to fall behind, it makes it incredibly difficult for them to catch up. So that's bucket one, is the significant and massive learning loss that lots of poor students and disproportionately Black and Brown students are experiencing, some of which we know may never ever recover. And so I expect to see in the next few years significant increase in the number of students who drop out because students will fall so far behind. They'll say, what's the point of trying to even catch up?
Mhm.
The second bucket is really around the fact that this pandemic has been heavy for a lot of folks. And what we have not really sort of taken toll on is the social and emotional and mental health impact it's had on our students.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, school for a lot of our students, I would maintain for all of our students, is a social place. It's about connectedness. It's about peer relationships. It's about connection to adults. And that's been taken away from all students for the last 7 months, right? So the number of students who are experiencing social isolation, anxiety, depression, even we've seen some data that's shown over the last several months, the increase in suicidal ideation amongst kids has increased because kids are feeling completely sort of disconnected from the fabric of what helps to make their worlds sort of work, if you will. So
Yeah.
the social emotional fallout is huge. And even when students do come back to the in-person learning, what we know is that what they have experienced for the last 7 months, the effects of that just doesn't disappear because they're back in school.
Yeah.
In many ways, the sort of the long-term ramifications of social emotional mental health can last for years for students. We see that with young people who lived through Katrina, who are still suffering some of the effects of that. We've seen that with young people who experienced 9/11. The effects lasted for 10, 12 years. So in this moment, as young folks have lost loved ones, as their family members are essential workers, as they're having to find work for themselves, as we're seeing a number of students face increased homelessness, just the overall sort of emotional toll is going to be huge for lots of students, or it is huge for lots of students.
Hmm.
And I think that needs to be a concern as we think about the state of education. And the third bucket is one that we're seeing more data on. The third bucket is around the fact that there are some students out there, we just don't know where they are.
Yeah.
There are some estimates that there are close to 3 million students who have not logged on, who have not been connected to. Teachers, principals, schools can't find them. 3 million students. And what we know is that schools, if nothing else, though learning is supposed to be one of the goals and objectives, school provides a place for kids to go to for 7, 8 hours a day, where there's a roof over their head, where they get, 2 meals a day, where there's some sense of routine and familiarity. But when you take that structure away, a lot of kids begin to really struggle, and the vice of all kinds of other issues become real. So there are 3 million students. I mean, that's half of the number of students we have in California nationwide, that we just don't know where they are. They haven't logged on. We have no record of them, no enrollment, no contact. So that third bucket is that we got to face the fact that there are millions of students out there that are just unaccounted for because of this virtual moment. And I think we have got to think about how these issues raise concerns around equity. They also raise concerns about basic needs that students are not having met. And my work has always been focused on sort of the racial justice piece of this, right? I think that when you look at who really struggles the most in these kinds of crises, typically it's Black folks, it's Black students and Black families.
Yeah.
And same thing for our brown brothers and sisters. They also catch a lot of hell in these times as well. So I think as we look at the state of education, also recognizing some of the racial realities in light of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement of late, that's also an issue that I think schools have got to come to grips with. How are we talking about, creating anti-racist classrooms, anti-racist schools? How do we have an anti-Black racism focus in everything that our students interact with? So schools and the state of education right now are struggling, juggling with a lot of different factors.
Right, right. Thank you for that. And just the fact that you can give us that insight is amazing. I have several family members who are teachers in my life, and we hear a lot about the toll that is taking on them. Not a lot of them were trained to teach online and how to, there's a lot of, professionalism, I think, that goes into the educational process to become a teacher. And within that, you learn how to, kind of control a classroom. Now having to do that online, I know there has to be another bucket that speaks to, what the teachers are dealing with as well.
Yeah, and so that's the I think that's the next shoe that's about to fall, because I think in the initial push with COVID and virtual remote learning was the focus on students, students, students for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But now what we're seeing is the very point you just mentioned, Otis, that a lot of teachers are struggling in this moment, because for a lot of teachers, this remote thing is completely foreign. And what we see is a bit of a divide. The divide being that teachers who are a bit on the younger side, who have much more technological savvy, are much more, able to figure out how to make this Zoom thing work. They're able and willing and to sort of figure out how to create more engaging discussions in the virtual format. But our more seasoned teachers who just don't even, some don't have email, some don't know about websites, those folks have struggled more. And that has made it really difficult just in terms of just the navigational ability, if you will, of these devices. You couple that with the fact that for many teachers, they're trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in the virtual space for their students. But if they have their own children, they're also trying to sort of
Yeah.
keep tabs on how their children are doing with their virtual learning. Some of the teachers I spoken to, not only are dealing with their own children, their students, but then they may have, parents that they're caring for as well in their household. So they're really struggling with a lot, trying to balance a lot. And so what we're also seeing is a number of teachers who are going out on stress leave, who are going out on disability leave, who just feel overworked and overwhelmed. And again, I think this is an equity issue, because when you look at where those teachers are likely to be, who are stretched thin, who are tapping out, early retirement, disability leave, those teachers tend to be in the schools that have the greatest needs. So again, you got Black, brown, and poor students are more likely to see this turnover of teachers. A lot of schools are struggling to find substitute teachers in the virtual space, which means you're going to have underqualified teachers teaching students who need more. So yeah, I think we need to be concerned about our educators because they're facing a lot in this moment as well.
Right. And because we see you on television and big screen, and we've seen a lot of your expertise. Talk to us about some of the things that I know you've been working on before this COVID pandemic hit us. That speaks to things that we need to be instituting to really kind of help see that the educational space is moving towards a 25th century reality for all students.
A lot of my work, Otis, has been looking at issues around inequities and in schools and education. And prior to COVID, we were looking at the ways in which young Black and Brown students experience schools and ways that schools can be more racially inclusive. We've had a report that just came out just a few weeks ago that looked at homelessness across the state of California. Deeply troubling, deeply disturbing. We found that there are 270,000 young people here in the state of California who are experiencing homelessness. And we collected these data, Otis, prior to COVID.
Mhm.
So the numbers we are anticipating are probably even higher post-COVID. And with the Dodgers being in the World Series, the analogy that we use is that 270,000 students who are experiencing homelessness would be enough to fill up Dodger Stadium 5 times. That's just a sort of a visual representation of how this thing is working. And as we did our analysis, we found that again, that Latinx students were overrepresented when it comes to homelessness. They represent about 54% of the state, but about 70% of the students who are experiencing homelessness.
Mhm.
Black youth are about 5-6% of the state, but about 11% of the students who are experiencing homelessness. So they're about double the rate. So we're always trying to figure out what is it that we need to do to respond to the ways in which these crises, when they happen, they hit Black and Brown families and Black and Brown communities harder than anybody else. And so we put forth a number of recommendations on the fact that schools cannot be expected to do this alone. This requires more state investment around services for our families who are experiencing homelessness. It also requires some increased federal funding that needs to be directed and dedicated towards the McKinney-Vento Act, which is the very piece of legislation that's designed to help make sure that our students who are experiencing, housing insecurities get the kind of supports that they need. So the work that I do is always saying that we have to recognize, and this is the bottom line, is that we put a lot of pressure on teachers to turn around outcomes academically for our students. But the reality is this: we know that if students are hungry, they're not going to reach their full potential.
Mhm.
We know that if students don't know where they're going to sleep at night, they're not going to reach their full potential. We know that if students are in a foster care system that sort of passes them along from home to home, place to place, they're not going to reach their potential. We know that if students are dealing with deep-seated poverty, they're not going to reach their potential. So the bottom line is that there are factors beyond the schoolhouse that require our attention if we're going to help maximize the ability of our students in the schoolhouse. And that's where the work has been, is that we got to take a larger sort of macro structural approach to understand that there are a lot of factors that our young people are dealing with every single day that no child should have to deal with. And so we have to help schools be better to fulfill their mission, because if we don't, we'll see students continue to fall through the cracks, and we'll point the finger at their families, we'll point the finger at the teachers, or we'll point the finger at their students. Yet we don't look at the overall neglect that we have not sort of attended to in terms of the kinds of supports that we know needs to be part of the larger ecosystem that our students are growing up in.
Definitely. I mean, that's always been something that I think, being a kid who grew up, my father was in the Air Force, so we took buses to get to school, and our bus driver was always really strict. And one of the things he would always say is, if I don't get you there, you can't get what you need, And so making sure that before they get there, they're getting what
Right.
they need is very important in that process as well. Um, so, Dr. Howard, any silver lining that you have, as it relates to what we are currently dealing with?
Yeah, I think that if there's a silver lining here, we are learning that there are some different ways to do school. And I think that what I and others have called for years was that we needed to reimagine the very model we use to educate young people. We still, even in 2020, use an 18th century model to educate kids. Desk and rows, chalkboard, all eyes on the teacher, in school for 8 hours. We have this very regimented way that many young people learn how to figure out, But the reality is this, Otis, that there are a lot of young people, even prior to COVID, who were saying, this does not work for me. Having to sit in a classroom for a full 55, 60 minutes being bored out of my mind does not work for me. Having to sit in an elementary classroom for 6, 7 hours does not work for me. Having to learn in this very sort of, sort of antiquated way does not work for me. If there's a silver lining in this moment, what we are learning now is that this remote learning does work for certain students.
Mhm.
It gives them greater autonomy. It gives them greater independence. I have a couple young students who I was talking to just a few weeks ago about how they were making sense out of this learning moment. And both of them said, I prefer this because I can get done in 2 hours what they would ask me to do in 6 hours at school. So now I can also work a part-time job. I can also train for my basketball team. So I think what we're doing, our young people have always been much more proficient with technology than we have been, Otis, right? To this day, I'll go get a brand new phone. I'll give it to my youngest son. I'm sitting here reading through the manual and he opens it up and he just pushes a few buttons. He hands up like, here, Dad, it's ready to go. I
Right.
think young people have been telling us in their own unique way for years that technology is their medium. I
Mhm.
think it's the older folks who have been sort of, more reluctant to engage in technology. And I think in this moment, hopefully we will reimagine how we think about education. We
Mhm.
will begin to rethink the way we do schools. And even when we get a vaccine or whatever, and our young people are back in schools, I hope we don't throw away what we've learned from the Zoom moment, is what I'm calling it. I
Yeah.
think this is working for a lot of students. I've heard from students who say, look, I've been bullied at school. The fact that I can sit at home kind of helps me to not have to deal with certain issues. Some kids have all kinds of social anxiety. So this gives them a different kind of format to engage and learn. So I think that we're going to ultimately see a model where when schools come back, or at least I hope we do, that you may have 70% of your students who are in the physical space of school,
Mhm.
but you may have another 25, 30% of students who still remain in the virtual format just because it works better for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. This is where we have to reimagine and be innovative when it comes to education, because we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, as my grandmother would say, and expect a different outcome, because that's a sure sign that you're crazy. So the silver lining is that we've always said in education, we need an opportunity for a reset. We need an opportunity to kind of step back and sort of just erase everything on the board and start from scratch. And so in some ways, as sadly as it might be, this might be our reset.
Mhm.
This might be our opportunity to erase the board and start thinking, what is it that can help us think what school should look like? And if we're going to do that, and I'll say this, we need to make sure that we are asking young people what they want and need in schools, because they are the ones who we're serving. Yet far too often, we don't talk to students. We don't ask what they need. We don't ask what their preferences are. We don't ask what they like or dislike about schools. And I hope in this moment, we're able to anchor their voices and their perspectives to help us rethink what schools look like moving forward.
Dr. Howard, thank you so much for your time. And I think that if you are a part of that conversation as it relates to moving out of the reset, I think that our students are going to be okay. Thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate you. Stay well, sir.
You likewise, Otis. Thank you for having me.